My name is Gill Phillips, and I'm the creator of Whose Shoes, a popular approach to co-production. I was named as an HSJ 100 wildcard and want to help give a voice to others, talking about their ideas and experiences. I'll be chatting with people from all sorts of different perspectives, walking in their shoes. If you are interested in the future of healthcare and like to hear what other people think, or perhaps even contribute at some point, Whose Shoes Wildcard is for you. Listen in the box room, listen in the park, listen in the morning, listen after dark, listen in the bath, listen in the car, stop and listen wherever you are. And people are. Lovely to meet Kat Thomas from Community Catalyst, who tweeted to tell me she is indeed listening in the box room. So who would have thought it? We've got to 10 episodes already. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different and stop and reflect on my podcasting journey so far. You get a little whizzy congratulations thing with sparkles from Buzzsprout. It's all rather encouraging. Short version, I'm loving it. There you are. You can stop listening and carry on with your weekend. But if you want to know a bit more, then please stick with me for a bit of a roller coaster ride. Some of it has been harder than I thought. So here you have a podcast about podcasting, the reflections of a newbie. And for a bit of moral support, here's a lovely reflection from my friend Fabob's Flow, Florence Wilcock, the creator of the awesome The Obs Pod, a podcast about all things maternity.
My wonderful friend Gill recently started a podcast, Wildcard Whose Shoes. To celebrate her 10th episode, she's asked me to reflect on what I think she's achieved and how it's made me feel as a listener. I always knew Gill was an amazing person with an incredible network of fascinating people. The key thing of Wildcard Whose Shoes for me has been that reinforcement that there are fantastic people everywhere across the system in every aspect and every role who are enthusiastic, want change, and are fighting to get it. Those rebels, those boat rockers. I really feel that Wildcard Whose Shoes has helped refresh me. It's given me new energy. It's made me realise I am not alone as someone who wants to improve things. Some of the episodes have really hit me at the core. I think my favourites so far have to be the incredible Joan and his desire to improve and change, and to do it in the face of being told not to do it, and how he tries to win hearts and minds, but in a slightly devious way. And then the latest episode with Rachel Grimaldi of Card Medic. Her idea that for every person you treat, they should feel that they are the only person that you're looking after, that there are no other drains on your time. It's obvious, but it's really given me pause to reflect and think about my own practice. And is that really true? When I have a family sitting in front of me and I'm talking to them, am I certain that that's how they feel? That they are the only ones, that they have my full attention? And it's even making me think I need to do my own podcast episode on that topic. So congratulations, Gill, on reaching episode 10.
Thanks for that, Flo, and congratulations, Joan and Rachel, for making it into Flo's favourites so far. Flo is my magic mate, so of course I'm going to be recommending one specific episode of the Obs Pod. It's called Magic Mates, the episode that we recorded together, talking about how we've used creativity and other maverick tactics to build the incredible social movement that is MatExp, Maternity Experience. I love making connections, friendships, and of course occasionally magic mates. One super bonus of making this podcast is connecting with lots of new people, both as podcast guests and particularly listeners. Huge thanks to all of you. Sometimes this is leading to a deeper relationship or just having the chance for a real catch-up with people that I already know by being able to chat to them on the podcast. All those conversations where you say, we must catch up, and now we do. I really do know some amazing people. And of course, when you invite them to talk about what's important to them, they often open up about aspects of their life and their work, anecdotes and stories that you didn't previously know, and which make you just so proud of them. A really exciting aspect, which I hadn't fully anticipated, is that the podcast is serving to connect contributors and listeners to each other. A real wildcard network is growing. Obviously, a lot of this is online, but it's also translating into real-life meetups now. I'm very excited to be getting together with a little gang of people doing fantastic work around reducing health inequalities. I came across the ultimate network weaver in our podcast last week, and things have gone up a gear. Rachel Grimaldi. We've never met in person, but we're now planning a meet-up in London with two of our most innovative FabObs friends. That means fabulous obstetricians. FabObs is the shortcut that we use on Twitter, who are all doing great work around language, communication and interpreting services. In no time at all, hashtag intentional coffee morphed into intentional hot chocolate and has now become a plan for intentional dinner. We'd better make it happen soon or we'll be planning an intentional world tour. Serendipity can also play a part. I couldn't believe it when I realised that Flo and I were both talking about translation in our podcast during the same weekend. And of course that gives extra opportunities to bounce off each other and spread ideas and conversations further. Rachel is so lovely. She's so passionate, and since we recorded the podcast last weekend, she's been sending me spontaneous little voicemails, simply buzzing with ideas and practices that make people's lives better. Rachel's an anaesthetist and loves taking photos or coming up with other little touches that improve birth experience in accordance with the woman and her partner's hopes and wishes. As I say, these voicemails were not recorded for the podcast, but I loved the energy and the spontaneity so much that I asked Rachel if I could share a clip or two, and she kindly agreed. I really hope I didn't bounce you into this, Rachel, but I love them so much. You can hear Rachel walking along in the autumn leaves.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. I always take photos for my patients because I'm like, you don't want to look back and think I didn't get a picture. So I'm always the official photographer and doing videos, and like afterwards when the baby's born, I'm like up close taking pictures of like them holding the fingers and mummy and daddy looking at the baby, or mummy and mummy, or daddy and daddy, or looking at the baby and having those first cuddles, cutting the cord, weighing the baby, trying to capture all of it. It's very doable to be official photographer, and I love it. I love capturing those little moments. Yeah, I think it just really helps make it really personal. I always want to make sure that, if women have a birth plan, that if they end up coming to theatre, that, are there things on that birth plan we can do, like put music on, or I don't know, whatever it might be, if they want doula to be there or something, that we have a doula. It is harder to recreate these things in theatre.
When people get laughing and chatting about possibilities, that's when the magic can happen. I loved hearing Rachel chatting about being imaginative and pushing the boundaries to make care more personalised. And as she says, it just fits in so well with our MatEx maternity experience.
It's just like learning from other people's stories, isn't it? Because sometimes you think, oh, fairy lights in theatre, I wouldn't have thought of that. We should do this as a thing. And I was like, yeah, we should have like some kind of package that you can offer a woman when she comes into theatre to say, would you like the calming package where we wheel out the fairy light garlands and dim the lights? And obviously you can't do that in a cesarean because you need to see what you're doing surgically. But if you're doing a trial of forceps or something, you need some lighting, but you can dim the lights a bit. And you've got the music on, and obviously we can't burn candles, but we can definitely do some gentle lighting and soft music and things. So, and there are bits of that you can do for C-sections as well.
And listening to Rachel talking there, it's really important to make clear that this is not just an idea. Using fairy-like garlands in theatre is something that Rachel's actually done and didn't get into trouble for. It's such a wonderful thing to think that instead of the whole birth plan going out of the window, as women so often say, these amazing healthcare professionals are constantly looking for ways to adapt their practice and find safe ways to make the experience as good as it can be. As Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. People will remember that they felt safe and cared for, that someone went the extra mile stringing up fairy lights on drip stands during the pandemic. We sometimes have strings of lemon light bulbs at our Who Shoes workshops, so who knows, perhaps one day someone in theatre will enjoy having those. Perhaps this will be the next thing, like Jenny the Midwife's Skin to Skin Challenge or Flo's Lithotomy Challenge, the Calming Package Challenge. I love it. It will be interesting to see what people think. Please tell us your thoughts and share examples of what's actually happening, as there is so much great work happening around personalising maternity care. I have 2 other super networkers coming up, Terry Porritt from Fab Change Day and Yvonne Newbold, the inspirational author of the Special Parents Handbook. It will be interesting to see what new webs of connections we can build from those. If you like our Who Shoes poems, Terry and the Fab NHS Stuff team have invited me to run a Wildcard Who Shoes poetry tent at the forthcoming Fab NHS Change Day. Mr. Who Shoes' face was a picture when I told him that. I have absolutely no idea what we'll be doing, but a few friends have agreed to join me, people from the NHS who've written really powerful poems. So I'm really looking forward to it. The event is on the 24th of November and our tent unzips at 2 p.m, so you're very welcome to join us. I'll put some details in the programme notes. So I'll chat first about my experience of podcasting and what I've learnt. I might come on to talk about the process a bit more, as several people have asked, how do you make a podcast? We'll see. I love working out loud with this podcast series. It's all so new to me. If I say I have a problem, someone will usually jump in and help. Similarly, people seem to enjoy hearing about some of the ups and downs. I don't know. We'll find out in terms of the response to this episode and whether people would like me to share a few more reflections as I go along with the series. I'm really trying to grow the series in an organic way. As I plan each episode and try and work out where the series goes next, I have the structure of my Who Shoes board game sitting loosely behind what I'm doing. And so far we've had a good mix of people with lived experience, healthcare professionals, people doing amazing things in the community, and people in positions of slightly more formal power. And those are the main perspectives and groupings in Who Shoes. No hierarchy, just people is a central mantra to my work, but I want to include people with positional power too, choosing the ones who really get it and are able and willing to engage with grassroots people. I've almost hooked 1 or 2, but they're being a bit elusive. Watch this space. I'm deliberately not going in any way that specialises in a particular area. Some people are suggesting that we could do more in-depth work around this or that, but I'm keen to mix things up. I want to keep it broad and light, counterbalancing difficult or thought-provoking topics with something lighter and more entertaining. It's always been my Who Shoes dream to break down silos and show how everything joins up, or at least should do. How we're all interdependent, as we've learnt so painfully during lockdowns and the whole pandemic experience, really. The ways in which we're all far more similar than we are different, our shared humanity, comes through strongly in our Who Shoes workshops. Very similar themes come through, regardless of whether people are talking about dementia, say, or maternity, or children's services, or whatever it might be. Good communication, dignity, respect, being listened to, basically being treated as a human being with hopes and dreams and aspirations. Just take a look at some of the graphic records produced by our friends, the wonderful visual recorders from New Possibilities, who capture the conversations at our workshop so authentically. These are the themes that we're exploring and fleshing out through people's stories in this podcast series. Anna and Carrie, the graphic artists, will make wonderful podcast guests at some point as they see and hear so much. So many different conversations, and particularly so many different workplace cultures through the work that we do. We sometimes joke between us that when the CQC or other inspectors come in, everyone's trying to paper over the cracks, whereas in our sessions, we're aiming to create the conditions for people to feel safe and inspired enough to want to expose those cracks and then work together to fix them. In terms of actually inviting podcast guests and setting up the recordings and any kind of pre-chats that we have, it's been a bit like the hokey cokey. One guest is lined up, but then life gets in the way, people are busy or sick, the dreaded tickly cough gets in the way. I know I had a tickly cough when I recorded the session with Carol Munt, but because Squadcast, the software that we use, records our voices on 2 separate channels, I was able to cough while Carol was talking, and the finished result sounds as though the overdose of Volcadine that I took had worked really nicely. Similarly, the podcast recordings come along like buses in terms of actually arranging dates. Everyone's free at the same time. One thing I've learnt is that I only ever want to record one session in a day. They take energy and I find them personally quite draining. Similar really to what I find when I run an actual Who Shoes workshop. I want to be able to give full attention and energy to each person, including trying to come to the conversation as well prepared and as well informed as I can be. It reminds me of what Rachel Grimaldi was saying about making each person feel genuinely, in her case she was talking about patients, that they are the only person who matters to you at that time, as Flo picked up and liked so much in the clip that I shared at the beginning. So I think it's ensuring really that both of us, me and the podcast guest, have the time and feel safe to really just chat without any outside pressures. People are also suggesting new people that I can talk to, which is fantastic, but I already have quite a long list. So far, typically, each guest has insisted that I must speak to at least one more person, someone in their network. So at this rate, this series will have that elusive quality, that lovely buzzword, sustainability. I just need one of my entrepreneurial friends to create an app which finds only one amazing person a week and then pins them down to a fixed time and date. That would work well. As planned recording dates come and go, things also change fast. I'm really looking forward to speaking to Dr. Alice Leder. For her PhD at Bournemouth University, Alice used Who Shoes with men in Uganda to bring about culture change and improve maternal outcomes. As you can imagine, I so want to capture this story. I'm so proud of Alice. But I'm glad that the session was postponed because in the meantime, Alice has won the Vice-Chancellor's Award for her work. What a shame it would have been to chat without being able to mention this wonderful achievement. The podcast series is very organic, but sometimes it's good to tie in with external events. Some are planned long in advance. I've already mentioned Fab Change Day. We'll put Terry Porritt's podcast recording out on the actual day, 24th of November, to make it topical and to have maximum impact. She's got her team lined up to do some great tweets. But some opportunities pop up at much shorter notice. As many listeners will know, as co-founder of MatX with FabObs Flow, maternity care is very close to my heart. And there's a hashtag, March with Midwives, is now planned for next week, the 21st of November. It's springing up all across the country, so I really want to be part of that. not only attending my local event, but using the voice that I'm creating through this podcast series to help make more people aware of the issues. Now, all being well, I have someone very special lined up. Someone to chat to me about the issues and pressures currently facing maternity teams, and we'll put it out next week to coincide with the March with Midwives events, but that's come along suddenly within the last 2 or 3 days, really. So what about statistics for the podcast series? It's easy to get hung up on statistics. How's each episode doing? How many downloads? Where are the listeners? It's possible to find out all sorts. Who's this cluster in Staffordshire? I blame that Lise Edwards. We seem to be doing okay. I've been following your podcast series. It's such a lovely thing to hear, and it's happening quite a bit now. One thing we do seem to be doing particularly well is the geographical spread. It intrigues me. We've got listeners from so many places. I know their locations, but I don't know their faces. Or perhaps I do. Who are you? From Finland, New Zealand, Ireland and Australia, Italy and Canada, and dotted around Malaysia. United States, Egypt, France and Qatar, Germany, UAE, Greece, Africa, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark and Romania, not to mention the dear old UK. My geography is improving. Seeing new places on the map is very moving. I've never been a great one for statistics. I prefer the human stories. But I want to know who the people are who are listening in all these different countries. Are they people I know? Of course, some of them tell me. Some of them are even kind enough to write reviews, which is amazing. But many of them are there as tantalizing snippets of data. Listeners in all these countries, with some regulars it seems. Thank you so much. How are you finding it? I live in wonder at all this technology. Perhaps it's my age, but I simply can't take it for granted. As a child, I remember when my mum used to phone relatives in Australia and she'd plan what she was going to say because it cost £1 a minute, and £1 was a lot in those days. The technology is awesome, isn't it? Yvonne Newbold mentioned and reminded me of the starfish story. I won't tell it properly here, but if you Google the starfish story, you'll easily find it. Basically, if you influence one person in a positive way, and Yvonne Newbold influences thousands of families, then it will all have been worth it. It feels as if the podcast is also a bit self-indulgent, but hopefully in a good way. A bit of a legacy for me. I know so many amazing people. Here's my chance to bring them together and share their voices and have a permanent record of it. A bank of amazing resources to draw on in the future. Like a lot of people, I'd love to write a book one day, the Who Shoes story, or perhaps a Matex special with Flo. We'll see. When my children were young, I started a book called Life in the Slow Lane. Well, it was so slow that I never actually got anywhere with it, certainly not in terms of getting over the finishing line or being published. But I still enjoy revisiting it for myself occasionally, capturing those little moments and anecdotes that would otherwise have been long forgotten. I guess I would have done it as a blog these days. I'm finding that a podcast series is similar to that. You don't need all the discipline of writing carefully structured chapters. I'm not very good at discipline. It doesn't really fit with being a wild card, does it? Or at least that's my excuse. So a podcast series is probably more realistic than writing a book. After all, I haven't even got round to finishing my website that I've been talking about for the last 6 years or more. I thought I'd better say that before someone else did. You know who you are. And crowdsourcing is definitely what I do, with a little bit of help from my friends and all that. I'd like to say a big thank you to the people who are listening. particularly the growing band of regular listeners. It's so lovely when people comment and tell me they're looking forward to the next episode. And then if we're also attracting a more specific audience for each episode, according to who the podcast guest is, whether they promote it strongly through their own networks, for example, and of course, depending on what the topic is. But I'd also encourage you to jump around and explore some of the other podcasts beyond the obvious ones for your specialty. For example, I think everyone will really enjoy the Halloween special that I did with children's author Rachel Wong. I think some NHS leaders would find Rachel's key messages around not being scared of innovation and creativity very useful indeed. Or listen to Carol Munt for sheer common sense. Kat Thomas tweeted about that episode. Love this episode. Absolutely no filler. So many powerful insights. Great to hear about positive actions and can do rather than just focusing on the issues. I love it when people recommend other people's podcasts. I've been a bit slow to the party with podcasting. I've always enjoyed a few. I mean, obviously, the Obs Pod, but now I've discovered this podcast app. I'm like a little squirrel. It's the same mindset, really, as how I collect and source Whose Shoes scenarios. So now I collect lots of podcasts in my very own podcast wallet. And you can pick each one up listening from where you got to. It's really very clever and simple. I particularly like the podcasts which are chats between friends or people who clearly feel at ease with each other. Flo's just recorded a podcast with Jenny the midwife, a wonderful friend of ours who's been a fearless global leader in promoting skin to skin of mother and new baby, including the operating theatre after caesarean births. Pippa Kelly's just spoken to Wendy Mitchell on her Well I Know Now dementia podcast. The King's Fund podcast has just spoken to Fatima Shah Khan. All podcast guests that I admire greatly as being outspoken, human and very real. Just as I like connecting people, if I hear a good podcast, I want to share it, particularly one that's like mine, new and needing a bit of help to get off the ground. Now, Yvonne Newbold told me about a fascinating podcast started by Dan, a really interesting and engaging 17-year-old, talking about his mental health and other issues during the pandemic. I feel strongly that young people have not had much of a voice during the pandemic, so it's my great pleasure to give a shout out to Dan's podcast. It's called The Perception Podcast, and so far I've listened to the first couple of episodes. In episode 2, Dan is joined by his mum and Sam, his 8-year-old brother, and I found it a really compelling insight into a family during lockdown, their family dynamics, a really honest conversation, and in particular some tips that might help other people. So who can help Dan spread his podcast further? It would mean the world to him. So thank you, Yvonne, for bringing this to my attention, and I'd invite people, please look him up. I love informality on a podcast. I like things that make people laugh. Mr. Whose Shoes was busy listening to an episode of PC Pro this week, talking about the pros and cons of a one-off payment for software as opposed to a subscription payment. One of the presenters' cats became the star of the show, meowing loudly in the background, reminding them of the need to keep the cat food subscription up to date. I haven't had our cats on my podcast yet, but perhaps I'm missing a trick. So as I come towards the end of this episode, I want to give a special shout out to my very first podcast guest, my lovely Just Do It friend, Dr. Fazana Hussain. Fazana, you got this series off to a perfect start, capturing that informal, possibly elusive note that I was looking for. Chatty, insightful, passionate, engaging, honest, and oh, so human. So what other early outcomes have there been from the podcast series? Each week we collect lemon light bulbs that emerge during our conversations. People have apparently found these incredibly useful. Someone I much admire messaged me and she said, "Gill, give me your inspiration. I'm just finalising a talk for next week that I'm doing for NHS England. One of the things they've asked me to do is look at asking challenging questions back to the system. Any ideas?" Well, what a great question. I thought about it and then I just referred her to the lemon light bulb summaries that are published in the programme notes of each episode. And she replied, "Oh, the breakdowns are so good, Gill. I love them. So useful." And using up the world's supply of exclamation marks in the process. So I took that as a success. Lots of other ideas are flying around. The most exciting is around linking whole networks. Perhaps a festival of ideas bringing inspirational women together. The theme of women supporting each other is strong. I think back to the Whose Shoes workshop that we did with the Brighton maternity team for International Women's Day, where they displayed this amazing gallery of inspirational women. And to be honest, my mind goes a bit crazy with possibilities. There are possibilities for doing some kind of group podcasts, linking 2 or more people who've met through the podcast series and getting them chatting together. I'm feeling more confident to try this now that I've done some of the one-to-one sessions. How we get reliably in people's diaries is another question. How about a webinar bringing everyone together? A few months, I don't know how long, into the podcast series, contributors and listeners meeting each other online, talking to each other. All of this is very bad for my sleep. And I've just seen the time. No, Gill, there's no time to talk about the process of making a podcast or the hard work that goes into even the most basic of edits, producing a description, a transcript, program notes, chapter headings, little soundbite extracts, and all sorts. I've talked enough. Perhaps another time. Or perhaps that's just boring. Let me know what you think. So finally, Amanda Pritchard, Chief Executive of the NHS, I hope you're enjoying the Wildcard Whose Shoes series. Don't forget, I set up this podcast series especially for you. Perhaps you're one of the listeners flagged up in these tantalizing statistics. But as we know, data only comes alive when we have human stories. And so huge thanks to everyone helping me to tell them here. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please subscribe now to hear more of these fascinating conversations on your favourite podcast platform. And please leave a review. I tweet as Whose Shoes. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and let's hope that together we can make a difference.